Oh, damn.
It was, I think it's really, really admirable and really important to be doing that sort of work. Um, what I'm wondering is,
Hay algunos
when
sabores
it
tan
comes
agrios que
to
te
protecting
muerden
the
las mejillas.
profitability,
Mis
technically,
mejillas.
what would you say your primary responsibilities are when it comes to activism, in other words, screening and ensuring that the environment is
Qué pena que no tengan nada
yeah,
cerdos del infierno.
I try to
No, en
deliver
realidad me alegro de que lo tengan.
truthful analysis that's both true to myself and true to the facts on the ground to the best of my ability. And I do think about that responsibility all the time. It's something that I try to maintain on the best of my ability. A lot of people think that their primary news source, and I think
¿Quieres
that's
bailar?
open some of the
Acepto.
time in the
El baile de
background
la
throughout the
cloaca
day.
mortal.
It's almost like an 8-hour CNN broadcast. So I try to not maintain a level of professionalism in
Soy el
tell
francotirador
these
más
stories, but
eficiente.
definitely maintain a level of
Salvo
professionalism
veces
when
que
it comes
no lo
to
soy.
verifiable evidence that I address and the fact management of radio
Nunca
analysis.
aprenderé a racionar la
Unfortunately, in this
munición.
age of misinformation, with AI, with doctor factors, the democratization of media has opened up opportunities for unique voices like myself to be heard. Voices that aren't so unique amongst the masses, but voices that are not necessarily represented in mainstream resources, in mainstream outlets, and legacy papers and whatnot. But there's also the other side of that, where there are a
¿El
lot of
arma viene
people
con
who
balas?
lean
Bien.
into bias training
Necesitaremos muchas
without
hoy.
even recognizing their own internal biases, and also sometimes just lie. Lying is old news, as I say all the time. And you would be shocked if you are unaware. If you only get your news from, I guess, BBC or that's what people, damn.
Conozco la
Okay,
fría
okay,
mano de
okay.
la muerte.
Well, the
Créanme.
Guardian, if you're only like reading the Guardian and New York Times,
Y
and
con la
those are biased.
desgracia del
They
truco de
have
dame
different
un
biases
abrazo,
as
no
well,
me
but
engañarás.
overall they have an interest in trying to maintain a truthful context to the best of their ability. Sometimes they do too much into the state of reconciling things, in my case, but
¿Cuál era el plan
there
B si
are
vaciaba
people
el
that
arma?
take
Podía ser
advantage of
machacarle
this
la cabeza a los
true
cerdos del
information that
infierno.
happens and just make stuff up in whichever way they see fit. And I try to combat against that to the best of my ability as well. Good, excellent today. Good, so
Ser turros es poco
so
grato.
there's also this lingering question a lot of people, have their minds as well. And so you get very clear that your criticism like from podcast listeners, for example, that your criticisms are aimed at those very government
Las barreras
and
tendrían que
lobbyist
haberse
interests.
probado con osos.
And I know that you have multiple followers
Ah,
on
lei è aperta.
right? But even among those who agree with you on the issues, there are some that say that sometimes the way that you
Aventarles un
express
arma
that or
no
the
es tan
language that
efectivo
you
como la
use
munición, sobre
is,
todo en el
for
espacio.
some
El
is
arma se
not
limita a
true.
alejarse
And
flotando.
so I wonder sort of how you think about
La
that.
valentía
Woo!
no te va, cerdo del infierno.
No!
This question I get all the time. And the way I see what I hear, sometimes it's a little bit abstract, but the way I see what I hear is I'm an innocent person. And as someone who tries to make this
Oh, no
information
te
as
gusta que
palatable
te
as
metan
possible,
balas en la
I'm
cabeza.
always
Qué
going to,
pena.
engage in hyperbole from time to time and try to crack jokes, even though a lot of the subject matter that I'm covering is very serious stuff. But I think I want to make it
¿No
as
quieres
accessible as
cabeza? Te
possible.
daría caña. Oh, espera.
There are going to be moments where I'm joking around with too much and people don't like it. But um, I think it's a valuable trade-off. I think that's totally a valuable trade-off. Another part of the Golden Force is the consistent back and forth communication I have with everyone.
El juicio no
Anyone
viene
that
antes de
follows
la
me right
caída. La
now on
muerte
Twitter.
viene después.
This is Scott, by the way. This isn't being streamed on Twitch as well. I forgot that because of anyone that follows me for 10 minutes on Twitch can talk to me in real time. And whether I have
Buono.
30,000 live concurrent viewers or 30,000 live concurrent viewers, I'm constantly monitoring chat. especially you know, anytime there's a journalist in the room that's covering what's doing, they're like, this is the most important thing they've
Apenas
seen.
le
I wouldn't
queda
say that that's
munición.
independent from what's
Pobre
going on.
Nicolai. Muerto también, pero
And,
primero
and that happens pretty slow
luego
back and
muerto.
forth communication style in my coverage as well that I've broken in my coverage as well. And that creates a unique opportunity for that. If that appears to Thomas Congress was pissed me off. I mean, your lecture is unique opportunity like that. It didn't come across that it was annoying. You know what I mean? They come over there like, no, that's not what happened actually. I know better. And you're like, I'm the teacher. Now, of course, there's the professional, they say, well, then, but but you need to be clear. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's awesome. You try it. It's a bad thing.
Is that online class for virtual time?
But yeah, I mean, it's inside of the room, that sort of thing. But of course, he's not
Dedicado al bebé. ¡Hijo de puta!
beautiful.
¿Estás orgulloso de ser ruso? Tengo que ser sincero. La mayor parte del tiempo se te ha visto
Might be unproductive.
si apenas te ríes
But
de
that
tus
comes
propios
with territory. And I feel like the medium
Los
of
tiradores
God
rusos son de
has
los
been
mejores
so
del
good
mundo.
in allowing people to have a say in the process and also learn
Qué mogólico, boludo, que son, man. No tenés nada, te toca y te mata.
Would you, just a quick follow-up, would you say sort of provocation too? Is it important for you to be provocative to generate responses?
provocative as far as my commentary.
Ya te las fotos, estás explotado.
The Young Turks called agitated propaganda. I think it's important to do agitated propaganda to unlock
Hay un culito de carnaval.
which is missing from this
Hay un
equation,
culito de
especially in the
carnaval.
Western world. But as far as like being provocative to say something crazy, no, that's not beneficial. I know people think that that is like the reason why I'm saying certain things, like you know whether or not America deserves a certain specific day. But no, that's just coming out of me sometimes when I'm really angry. But you know what's interesting is, in my experience, what I've found is that other people also share that same resentment. Other people also share that same anger. So when I'm yelling at like a transphobic person, for example, I don't even know if I should say, when I yell at them, or like a white supremacist racist, or someone who's denying the genocide of Gaza, sometimes there are moments where I lose a little bit of control, and then I get a 7-day ban. It is what it is. But that's not deliberate. There's no like if I had the option to not have those moments, I would choose not to have those moments for sure.
So, I mean, since you just mentioned Gaza and so on Palestine, I have this question, which is, in his book, One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This, Omar El-Akkad powerfully articulated this idea that with regard to the atrocities that have been suffered by the innocent in Palestine, this is how he puts it. One day, things will change. It is not so hard to believe, even during the worst of things, that courage is more potent than contagion. That there are more invested in solidarity than in annihilation. That just as it has always been possible to look away, it is possible to stop looking away. So how do you align yourself in relation to what Omar expresses there? And do you agree with this position? And is this why you have been so vocal about Palestine?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think people are good people in general. I think everyone is a kind person, but they are sometimes deluded or sometimes propagandized against certain positions and are made fearful of alternative visions of a better future. So I try to remind myself of that all the time, that everyone is, at the end of the day, a victim of social conditioning. And that definitely guides my first principle, that guides my commentary quite a bit. I've been an anti-Zionist and about anti-Zionist for the last 12, 13 years of my professional media career. And there was a time it shouldn't even receive flags, really, because this is the most normal position, and I know it's shared by every single person in here, except for some plants maybe in the audience. But that it's a humanitarian position. It's born out of being anti-genocide, anti-fascist, anti-apartheid. It's what I've learned, and I think that a lot of people have that. A lot of people's starting point is that, and then they work their way away from that with tremendous amounts of social conditioning. So I think it's actually much more difficult to make people turn a blind eye to these atrocities. And there's been a tremendous amount of success in bringing people back to that position of empathy, to that humanitarian perspective. And it's only because of the bravery exhibited by the Palestinians that even in their final moments, showing exactly what Israel was doing. And I thought of myself living in the imperial core as someone who's profoundly privileged and profoundly fortunate that the best I could do was offer a voice to that voiceless, offer a voice to that perspective to the best of my ability, in spite of all the setbacks set by, numerous advocacy organizations, lobbying efforts in deplatforming and censorship, because it was the least I could have done. Because I knew that inevitably people were going to wake up to what was happening, and I think we're there now. We're there. That the overwhelming majority of even Western society have now realized that this is untenable. A 14th century style siege taking place, a live Holocaust taking place in real time on people's phones that they can see in real time. I mean, this is completely unacceptable, and I think part of the reason why I do it is because I don't want those who were slain to die in vain, and part of it is because I want to preserve the safety and security of those that remain.
Kulit.
So well said. Appreciate you. So I mean,
No, no es
we
kulit.
want to get to a lot of core issues, and I think some of these were things that you addressed.
No, no eres ese culo, hermano. No eres de culo, eres el carnaval o la brazuca. Ay, 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 no paras.
So, of course, we're going to want to talk more about Canada and what's going on in particular. So, again, you already spoke about this briefly, but when it comes to the views on the Canadian current government and direction under Mark Carney, so, Mark Carney has openly expressed a desire to shift away from the U.S. for China and other nations.
Vis-a-vis travel to China, baby.
Uh-huh.
Can't beat it.
And so you already said this sort of in the lead up about the liberal international order and how that is, in a sense, decaying. And Stephen Walt of Harvard Kennedy School, he saw this, Mark Carney's sort of fairly recent comments as an example of a significant moment of rupture in the whole liberal international order, right? And you also said in January, and again, kind of just repeated it here, that liberalism is essentially falling apart. So, the question is, for you to sort of elaborate on that, to elaborate on your perspective and why you think that is the case, and especially why Canada and Canadian government's recent position is indicating that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I hope that Mark Carney follows through on that promise, and it's not simply empty posturing, and he's simply saying that so that he can cut a better deal with Donald Trump at the end of the day. Because it is a matter of life and death. It's always been a matter of life and death for those in the global south, because the liberal international order, the New World design post-World War II, was very quickly and very effectively developed as a way to whip up support against this new front in the Cold War, against communism, against socialism. And that was a dual polar world back then. And it's obvious that in the aftermath of the dissolution of the USSR, it was a unipolar world. It was the American hegemony, and since the 90s, I attribute a lot of the accelerated demise of Western liberal capitalist countries to the lack of competition, lack of ideological competition. I don't know if that's like a unique perspective in general. I feel like many people understand it to a certain degree, whether it be the expansion of welfare states in social democratic countries that are close enough to the USSR in order to not succumb to the threat of a good alternative, a scary alternative that might work. But I think the accelerated Thatcherite, Reaganite ideology of neoliberalism, or what some people call late-stage capitalism, happened because of that lack of competition. And basically, I'm saying is that capitalists are victims of their own success. They Sigma grind set it too hard, and now they have endless appetite for profits to the best of their ability, and for that reason, they have been dominating the most malleable aspect of production, which is labor. First, they went out and sought out markets that had cheaper alternatives for labor, and then they decided to continue dominating their own domestic labor force to the best of their ability. So I think what I'm trying to get at in this long-winded answer is that this design was never beneficial for many countries in the periphery. It actually meant endless militarism, instability, puppet states that were established, and complete domination and bloodshed, sanctions at times. And now, I think Europe and Canada are getting a little bit of that same taste as well, in ways that they never thought, perhaps due to Western chauvinism, never thought that they would experience. So I hope that it's, like I said, not empty promise from Mark Carney, but a real testament, a real commitment to making sure that we find a more peaceful path forward for every single party involved, and not just an opportunity for real powers to basically secure better trade negotiations and continue business as usual politics.
So would you say that when it comes to your position as on the left, essentially socialist, Marxist, Marx famously said that capitalism is going to produce its own grave diggers. Yeah, it is already. He wrote that at the time. So when it comes to the sort of the actualization of that, do you think that it is still, do you look at it kind of similar to Marx as an inevitability, especially under these current conditions as you just described it?
Yes and no, because I think the expansive welfare states have given a lifeline over and over again to thwart domestic instability, and it's been very effective. I mean, America has destroyed labor militancy. I promise you, it's so bad in the United States of America that we have, I think, 9% labor union participation in the overall workforce, which is 6% lower than Chile, a country that we specifically dominated because they had they made the mistake of voting for a democratic socialist. We couped them and we installed Pinochet, and it was a neoliberal testing ground. And even then, right now in modern Chile, they have a higher labor union participation in the United States of America. So it's been very effective in undermining any sort of left mobilization. And so for that reason, I think, capital owners are very effective at engaging in class warfare and have been able to delude even regular working class people into believing that they are simply not an exploited proletariat, but temporarily embarrassed millionaires and billionaires. So for that reason, I think there is still, no matter how much domination exists, there is still this attitude amongst the dispossessed masses that things are probably fine. You know, I can go to Tim Hortons down the street and get what are they called? The little Timbits, yeah, little Timbits. Or I go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac, and there is some truth to that. I mean, I think treats play a big role in sedating the masses for sure. But conditions haven't worsened yet. I think conditions have not gotten to the degree that it got to it during the Great Depression, for example. But it does worry me that the right-wing forces internationally are aware of the collapse of the previous order, and they're trying to get ahead of it to the best of their ability by organizing in a fascist direction as fast as possible.
We've been seeing that in parts of Latin America, right? And so, I mean, this is a good sort of pivot to this question, right? Since you just mentioned Chile, right? So the U.S., of course, has had a long history of intervention in Latin America. Anybody who studies this knows about it. We know it has a long history. So, Guatemala in 1954, Chile in 1973, as you said, Nicaragua from 1981 onward, and just like the list goes on, right? There's almost no country in Latin America that
playing. I just wanted to get the oil. And in a way, I think really tough time to be one of these like NATO Atlanticists or one of these like liberal analysts that writes for Foreign Policy magazine, because everything that Donald Trump is doing is a play-by-play of what Lenin has interpreted as the necessity for imperialism. And I don't know where we go from here as far as like whether people recognize that as wrong. I try to exhaust the contradictions to the best of my ability to explain to people like pointing to previous examples of failure with the global war on terror, even though it was very successful for the military-industrial complex, with ballooning contracts. It was great for Halliburton. It was great for development of the region and extraction of natural resources in the region for all of these massive conglomerates. Americans, by and large, didn't experience that economic prosperity, right? The concept of labor aristocracy is valid, it's true. Having said that, Americans never really got to experience the benefits of American empire all that much. So I try to use that to the best of my ability to say, look, what we're doing in Venezuela, what we're trying to do in Cuba, this vulgar imperialism is not even beneficial for you. So we must organize against it. We must chart a different path forward, one that focuses on international cooperation rather than endless domination. I don't know if that message is being well received by the right. I will say many of them voted for Donald Trump because they thought he was anti-war, or at least that's what they tell me. And then Donald Trump will come out like invaded Venezuela for oil, and then boom, you see the approval rating on that military action, it skyrockets on the right. They're like, oh, that's awesome. That's what I wanted, actually, all along. I really wanted Exxon to have a better quarter. That's what I wanted all along. I don't need to pay rent. I don't care about that at all. I forgot about the grocery bill. So not sure what it will do. I think maybe we'll see more and more people self-identify as fascists, or maybe self-identify as whatever the MAGA train looks like, whatever the MAGA movement looks like. And we are kind of seeing that, even here in Canada with the Albertan separatist movement. Oh my God, it's just, please don't give Alberta to us. I know many of you think, because I'm sorry, Canadians are either some of the best people that come to America or the worst, and nothing in between. Okay? You either, you get like, she's right. Steven Crowder, Stefan Molyneux, half of the New York Times op-ed writers. I think David Brooks, right? Tom McDonald, oh my God. That's what I mean. Ted Cruz. What the hell was that? Yeah, Jordan Peterson. Okay, you guys are dunking on your own country too much. But yeah, there are there are too many Canadians in America leaning into American fascism a little too much for my taste. But I forgot where I was going with that. I just, as soon as I start thinking about all these right-wing Canadians, I'm like, build the wall. No, I'm kidding.
So, okay, there's this, I had a follow-up about, about Venezuela, this, the general criticism of the U.S., right? And that's, I think, part of, like, the thread that runs through all this. So, like, you've been, of course, very critical of U.S. actions abroad, in general, U.S. foreign policy. And one of the things you also talked about, though, when it, again, as it came to the case of Venezuela, was, they have been facing a very repressive government. As you said, you don't have to necessarily agree with or want somebody like Maduro in power, but you could be critical of what the U.S. has done, right? So could you maybe say more about, or just elaborate on why you focus most of your criticism on the U.S., on its allies, and even sort of like on the West more generally? And so on, just that whole question of like liberation and supposedly going into like help these nations that have repressive governments. What are your thoughts on that? What happens on the other side?
I don't think America wants to help any of these countries. Let's just get that right out of let's just make that very clear, right? So I think that's a transparent lie. When America says, "Oh, we're coming to help out," just run, okay? They're not coming to help out at all. They're only there to prop up the Chamber of Commerce and get like the agribusiness sector leaders to run the country, as they've tried to do in Venezuela many times over. Um, sometimes it's a vengeance quest. In the case of the endless destabilization in Haiti, or even in Cuba, our strangling of Cuba in its final iteration, but even in the aftermath of the successful revolution in Cuba, just punishing them because our ally that propped up sugar plantations failed, right? In this like incredibly repressive structure that existed. Um, but as far as like repressive regimes around the world, I have a I have a different outlook on this than the average American does, because I grew up in Turkey, and what I saw in Turkey, which is again a country that is the second largest military in NATO, a country that has had tremendous amounts of intervention, oftentimes overlooked by America, in an attempt to create a bulwark against the USSR and directly place missile bases in the vicinity of the USSR, in the immediate area that the USSR existed in, and and because of that, our domestic politics has never been the same. There was a complete destruction of all sorts of different revolutionary Kurdish movements, workers' movements in my country, communist movements, socialist movements that were effectively destroyed by ultranationalists, which is a story that has played itself out in virtually every single Western European NATO ally country as well, to varying degrees. So I come from that background, and I recognize that American intervention oftentimes works with some of the most reactionary forces in the country to create some semblance of stability that is cooperative with American interests around the globe. And outside of that, though, I also recognize that when there is any additional attempted intervention, like the one, the coup d'etat that failed in Turkey that I wrote about for the Huffington Post, which is part of the reason why I can't go back to Turkey. Um, they didn't like that, even though I said it was a CIA operation, which I believe it is, um, propped up by a CIA asset named Fethullah Gulen, who was understandably branded as a terrorist movement. This coup d'etat failed, and in the aftermath, there was more repression. So and there was also a hardening of the otherwise the government that was falling out of favor leading up to it. So that's usually what many countries around the world experience whenever there's any sort of like direct Western instability and Western intervention. A lot of the more repressive forces come out and say, we are the only people who are truly anti-West. And in the region that we're both from, that expression is oftentimes fundamentalist, right? I think you know where I'm going with this. With the Iranian Revolution, um, the justification for the repression that came after, especially like the destruction of communist movements and all of that. Before that, it was a popular revolution against Western intervention and a Western-backed puppet. And we here in the West don't have the capacity to interpret that. We don't have the capacity to analyze that. We just look at it and go, oh, those are barbaric Muslims. Those are the barbaric third worldists and people in the third world. They don't understand. It's just they're too invested in Islam or something, right? And they can't comprehend that, like, for a lot of people, the wounds that they experience, the loss of life that they see, sometimes torturous conditions that they live through as a direct byproduct of American intervention, is the reason why they lean into some of the more repressive elements in the country, because those repressive elements might be seen as liberative. And that's my analysis.
This is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and trying to articulate what has actually happened and what has happened since the latest protests especially since early January. And there are all of these elements in those protests that have taken place recently um, that are, a lot of them are very troubling, right? There's this question of like, to what extent are they organic in terms of like what people in Iran are actually demanding and how much of it is from foreign interference. But there's of course the reality that, a lot of that has been long in the making, right? There have been waves and waves for decades of protest movements within Iran, but again, those have grown organically, right? They are demands that Iranians have been making against their government. And so I'm also of the view, like, I mean, I completely see what you're saying when it comes to that case against foreign intervention. We have today in the Iranian diaspora, especially, there is a noticeable kind of split, right, between these pro-monarchist groups, or those who at least, have come to believe that the so-called crown prince was a Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah, that he somehow represents, liberation, right, and that he's.
That's like, I don't think he even wants to do it. I feel like Graham went there and was like, we gotta do this. And he's like, come on.
He has not had it. No. So one of the things that has been, I think, really troubling about this kind of discourse has been that the people who have been sort of backing him among the diaspora, again, think that there's something like a viable alternative there, right? And that somebody like him is going to bring about supposedly a secular democratic Iran. And this gets back to that point about, like, on the flip side of it, it's like, oh, it's like, if you disagree with that, then you are a terrorist supporter, etc., right? And
I mean, I'm used to it.
yeah.
I'm like, oh, whatever.
Socialist-oriented Muslim man, like, who would have thought that you get eaten? But I mean, so again, I feel you on all of that. The question I think that remains in the case of Iran, and that I think is really pressing, is that because so much of that actual, resistance that is happening within Iran, the organic resistance by the people themselves, there are legitimate claims that people are making, right, in terms of like forms of freedom that they genuinely want to fight for, and they don't necessarily want foreign intervention. And I know this to be the case for a lot of Iranians who are actually inside the country, who I always communicate with. And so, what do you think of that when it comes to this question of like legitimate resistance on the part of the people themselves, without foreign intervention, and fighting for a more sort of democratic future, but on the people's own terms?
Yeah, I think American, and in the case of Iran, Israeli intervention especially, which is basically American intervention, to be real, ends up harming the movements, at least in terms of like the way that the majority, or not even the majority, but like a significant chunk of the population sees the legitimacy of it. And I feel as though, like, at least in my advocacy, I focus on trying to do my part as an American citizen. Oftentimes my statements fall on deaf ears, but I think the best possible thing we could do, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me on this, is to try and stop starving the Iranian population through the sanctions regime that we have implemented. Because I do believe that Western intervention legitimizes the, like, I don't believe it's legitimate what the government is doing, but I do believe that, at least in the eyes of their own like loyalist population, which is a significant percentage, right, 20 to 30%, it legitimizes the violent actions that they take. Anytime, and it's not an accident that when Mike Pompeo comes out and says, oh, like, Mossad agents are in the crowd with you, of course the Ayatollah is going to use that as a talking point to say, see, we have to slaughter all these people because they're openly admitting it themselves. And I feel as though if the people had more of an opportunity to be able to organize to the best of their ability without having to suffer starvation, as an impact of these sanctions, they would have a better opportunity to bring about legitimate, sovereign, secular democratic results for their own country. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but that's the only pathway that I can see. At least judging by like my own personal interactions with Turkish people and how much they despise the country and how much they rallied around the Erdogan administration in spite of their overall hatred for the Erdogan administration when the coup happened. So I think Western intervention is often not going to yield the success that Western nations want, and it's better to allow people to have their own real revolution, especially considering that, I mean, Iranian people are very resilient and maybe sometimes not even invested in any sort of outside help, sometimes, sometimes to a detriment. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that like there was a reason why the Iranian Revolution took place, and it would behoove the IRGC and the Ayatollah to remember that
Joder.
when dealing tremendous amounts of repression and suppression to the public, instead of listening to their demands and trying to find a more manageable solution, if that is at all possible at this point.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned this point about revolutionary optimism, we're going to come back to that point. There's also, just as we were speaking, to that point about sanctions, which I think you put really well in those. There's a book called How Sanctions Work by Vali Nash and Nigel Smith, who I think really goes to illustrate that point about how so much of what has been happening for a very long time now is due to that pressure of sanctions and the economic hardship has fallen on people. And I think it's great that you've also pointed to the importance of the fact that people are fighting for freedom, and this is a genuine movement as well. So there's a question, and I want to also include audience questions in here. I also have questions from some of my brilliant students at Fordham. And there's this one question from Sophia who asked, this is getting back to on the role of social media, and how speaking about all of these types of issues, including American foreign policy, but also just in terms of political mobilization. This is how the question is framed. So on the role of social media, we're constantly witnessing political crises, violence, and collective mobilizations unfold in real time through our screens, which can create the sensation of hypervisibility and participation. At the same time, and I don't know if you want to speak about what's happening on the far right on certain platforms, but the far right movements continue to grow, right? In part through some of the digital platforms. So, what do you think about how we confront this kind of contradiction between digital visibility and the simultaneous strengthening of exclusionary authoritarian?
Yeah, I think the far right mobilization on digital platforms still stems from the fact that they get a lot of financial backing and are not seen as antagonistic to the right-wing administration. Left-wing mobilization, on the other hand, requires grassroots support and is often antagonistic to liberals, which is the only expression of major left-flank politics in the United States of America, at least. So, for that reason, I mean, any opportunity that we have as leftists, we should seize on. So I do think that the digital grounds for organizing is still good, as long as there's still a focus on meeting one another in the real world and participate in regular society. Otherwise, all you're doing is posting on the internet. And as a prolific poster myself, I recognize that it might feel good at the time, but you're not really accomplishing any serious results doing just that. But I think overall, you like I said, you have to take every advantage that you possibly can, and I do think that the digital space has created opportunities to build community communities that are sustainable, communities that can be productive. I try to use mine to the best of my ability. I try to urge people to organize. I try to urge people to move in the direction of labor unions and community organizing in general, and do fundraisers and try to participate to the best of our ability in both broadening people's awareness on certain injustices that are taking place, but then also directly get involved as well. As far as right-wing mobilization goes, I mean, they're somewhat rudderless, they're somewhat directionless because they are reactionary at the end of the day, and the only way that they organize is at the state level. But that is, from at least my calculations, that's just backed by capital in general. So they're going to do that no matter what. So I say we focus on our own initiatives and we focus on creating community defense and hopefully bring back labor militancy to a certain degree.
So very much that importance of, it's got to be accompanied by on the ground activities, right? Activism. So I'm going to bring in sort of more audience questions as well. Like I got one more question for you, so this is on belonging and in-betweens, right? And since you also spoke about, being from Turkey and things that you've experienced. So Edward Said, who, I take a lot of inspiration from, he memorably wrote about this experience of exile and sort of being in between the experience of migration. And this is something that, I think that I have also recently been venturing into this world of podcasting as well. And so, I address this with colleagues and friends. We have a podcast called Politics in New York City. Quick plug on that. So you were doing your plug, I'm gonna do my plug too real quick. And it's essentially inspired by this whole sort of this question of like why that is significant, especially for us, for people like us in this day and age, and the way that Saeed talks about this in relation to his identity as Palestinian and being displaced from Palestine. He had this experience of course, moving to the U.S. and having his whole academic career there. But when he made that move, right, especially when he was in New York City, he described it in these terms. He said that belonging to both sides of the imperial divide allows you to understand them more easily, right? Both sides. And that it creates these kinds of generative possibilities for what's called a public perspective. So I'm wondering, like, in your case, having, made this experience, do you think in any way along those terms between your experiences between Turkey and the U.S.? Would you say you think about that in similar terms? And also, how do you envision your place in the U.S. And the world generally in years to come?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I look and sound American to a fault, right? Even though I grew up in Turkey until I was 18 years old, and that's somewhat of a product of American culture exported everywhere around the world. And I grew up, I call myself an Ameribu, like a weed, but for America. And I grew up being fascinated by American culture, the American dream, as many people who migrate to the West also have a similar experience. And those dreams were shattered as soon as I got the first hospital bill. I was like, this is ridiculous. That's crazy. You guys don't know that here in Canada. Yeah. Well, yeah, unfortunately. Because you also have the same capitalist forces that are doing their very best to implement austerity and then bring the private sector in. I'm gonna tell you right now, it's devastating. When you go down to the south, when you go past that border, it's really bad. I don't need to tell you, you probably know. But anyway, my perspective is totally guided by my experience growing up in Turkey and then living half of my life at this point in the United States of America. And I think it gives you unique insight, but I think it also helps you. It also helps me become a more effective communicator because capacity to, I guess, disarm the Western audiences by, talking like an American, but with a very different framework that I operate off of, especially as it pertains to what I consider to be this last faction of American defense, which happens to be imperialism. Most people just take that for granted or don't even think about it, or are conditioned, at least in my experience, to go, oh, you don't like American military action, you're an outsider, you're an enemy. I'm very fortunate that I have a wonderful audience that has been much more open-minded than I ever thought they would be, as far as hearing this perspective. Having said that, that's how I use this duality to my advantage. My experiences growing up in Turkey that allows me to develop a different understanding of being on the receiving end of American intervention, and then my experiences in America as an American citizen make it easier for me to communicate with Americans.
So I have one audience question that is specifically about this, actually, which is on the differences between Democrats and Republicans in the United States. So you've often said that when it comes to, for example, coming back to the question of Gaza and Palestine, that also on the questions of foreign policy, that a lot of times Democrats and Republicans don't really seem that far apart, that there isn't like a major difference between them. So for people who
They get really mad when you say that. Yeah. They get so mad, and it's like, well, okay, where's Chuck Schumer? Like, where's Hakeem Jeffries?
But you got some people who, as you say, they get kind of angered by that, and then there are people who kind of like might find, they have sort of like a criticism of that, right? And this is sort of what has been popping up in some of the questions in the audience. So for people who say that kind of tends to flatten the differences, right? Or is equating like Democrats and Republicans. Like, what's your response to that? Do you think that we should also think about what actually separates them, or do you think that it's actually necessary to frame it that way, that they're not that far apart?
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of Osam Shabbat, who unfortunately was assassinated by the state of Israel under the watchful gaze of the Biden administration, it doesn't make a difference whether or not Raytheon is flying the LGBTQ banner or is anti-woke, right? From the perspective of the victims, it's all the same. It's more death and more destruction. And obviously there are differences between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, but when it comes to foreign policy, I'm not actually flattening that experience. It's just I'm looking at it from the experience of the recipients, the victims of empire. And from their perspective, there doesn't seem to be a lot of that. Otherwise, I'd ask the people in Yemen if it felt different when Obama was bombing them, as opposed to Donald Trump bombing them, as opposed to Biden bombing them, as opposed to Trump bombing them again, right? It makes no difference to them whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, because every president has to bomb Yemen. I think. I don't know if it's in the Constitution or not, but that's just what they've been doing so far. And that's basically what it is. I think a lot of Americans don't want to recognize that, and they also don't want to understand that what I want is a real anti-imperialist party. So when I communicate that to my elected, when I talk about this with people who are consulting for the Democratic Party, when I talk to politicians both on camera and off camera, this is what I try to communicate to them, that if you want people to see that you are different, that you're charting a different path, then you have to communicate that. You can't be shy about saying it out loud. And I think that demonstrating this moral backbone will be beneficial down the line, even from an electoral perspective. We've seen that now with the tide shift that took place on Gaza. I think before October 7, you would get punished if you actually were outspoken about the plight of Palestinians. And now, if you dare to say that you're pro-Israel, at least on the Democratic side, a lot of people are going to yell at you and might not even vote for you. I mean, we're seeing as the midterms are coming, up, we're seeing this be a major point of contention, a way to show that you're earnest, show that you're different from other politicians. Many people in the primaries are positioning themselves as being anti-Israel. So there's electoral benefit as well. Not only is it the morally correct position, but it's also an electorally beneficial position too. So I try to stress that to the best of my ability, and hope that maybe one of these two major parties will truly present an anti-imperialist path forward, one that recognizes the dignity and sovereignty of nations and doesn't see them as simple collateral damage in our endless problems.
So, I mean, this is a very related question that's popped up a lot in the audience questions. So, at the level of institutions, when it comes to countering those kinds of things, do you think that universities generally should be looking more at divestment? So, for example, do you see other universities?
Yes. You're gonna get in trouble. Yes, of course. I'm a massive advocate for boycott, divestments, and sanctions on the state of Israel. 100%. It's a. I know that. I know that it's a. I mean, it's the least we can do. And it's been successful in the past. I mean, this is exactly what happened with apartheid South Africa. And unfortunately, apartheid South Africa's close ally, apartheid Israel, recognized how devastating that was for South Africa, so they took the initiative to make sure that it doesn't work in the Western world. But absolutely, I think profiteering off of these war crimes is morally unconscionable. And once again, it goes back to the argument that I was presenting earlier. It's the most peaceful solution to sever ties with Israel to the best of our ability, to participate in cultural boycotts, to, at least in the most peaceful ways, punish the state of Israel for engaging in these heinous crimes. If we're really anti-genocide, we have to do that. It's the bare minimum, in my opinion.
So this is kind of, again, this is going to lead us to thinking about the question of real, genuine things that could be done for the betterment of the world and of those who suffer under these kinds of conditions. One of the things that tends to predominate in a lot of ways these days is this question of pluralism, right? That so many people find it really difficult to maintain a sense of hope in the face of everything that's happening. So how do you think, and then we'll kind of approach the question one more time in a different way after this group, but generally, how do you think we deal with solidarity?
Solidarity is the antidote to the poison of divisiveness. Our capital overlords want us to be fighting one another all the time, neighbor against neighbor, sectarian conflict, ethnicities, all of this stuff. But in my experience, I feel alienated when I'm at home, when I'm in front of a computer. But in my experience, going all around the world, participating in protests, tasting the tear gas and pepper spray of French police and American police and police of all different backgrounds, I can tell you that when you're in that crowd with like-minded individuals who are singularly focused, who recognize right from wrong, solidarity is the closest expression of love that I have ever felt with my fellow men, no matter where I go. And that's precisely how I maintain revolutionary honesty.
So the last question I want to ask you is to really delve into the meaning and the ways to actualize that kind of right? And I know that you have spoken about this, very, very powerfully, speeches that given. What would you say if, what is the actual last thing, finally, on this question of revolution? What would you say?
I think